As you're walking around the workplace, look at things that are happening. Is there something there that really stands out that could create a hazard? Looking at how people work, how they're using the equipment, what things are around that could be causing a hazard or have the potential to cause a hazard, as well as just making sure that, the general state of housekeeping is maintained. If there's dirty things around that could create a hygiene issue or hygiene hazard, that's something that should be taken into account. As I said, if there's cords there or the end of the cord, is frayed and not safe, or if the electrical equipment is too close to the water, could that be a hazard, and is that something that needs to be identified? So once you've identified the hazards, you want to then assess the risks. And again, you start to look at what type of harm could occur. So example here, is it a muscular strain, fatigue, burns, laceration? How serious could this be? Could it cause a serious injury? Could it be fatal? Or is it only likely to cause a minor injury that might just need some first aid rather than hospitalisation or additional treatment? And what factors could influence the severity of harm that occurs? So it could be how far someone could fall, if they're working on a work site, making sure they've got their proper harnesses, and how high does that have to be before they have to have a harness? Those factors that need to be taken into consideration. And how many people that are exposed to this hazard could be harmed, so it might not just be the workers there in that environment, but could this potentially affect other people as well? If somebody's working on, say, a work site, and they have a fall or a piece of scaffolding or something might come loose, could that injure someone else? So again, you need to take all of those things into account. And again, from a small business, from a natural health practice, this might be as far as your products and the materials that you're using. Is there any risk? Do you have clients' children that come in? Have they got access to your dispensary, for example, or have they got access to needles if you're performing acupuncture? All of those sorts of risks, again, that you may not sort of think that they're that serious, but obviously they can be, once you start assessing that risk. Also looking at the likelihood that someone will be harmed. So you can estimate that by looking at how often is the task performed. So, and does performing that task make it more or less likely that some harm could occur? How often are people near that hazard? So if it's a piece of machinery, for example, how many people actually go near that piece of machinery? Has an incident happened before, either within your own workplace or at another workplace? If it has, how often? Because again, you need to take that into consideration, because, if it can happen somewhere else, were there health and safety procedures in place, or do you need to make sure that you're implementing them, or if they were involved, were they sufficient? Do they need to be revised and assessed? When you're assessing risks, you can rate the likelihood as something that is certain to occur, very likely, possible, unlikely, or very rare. So generally you would have a template that would list all your hazards, and then you start looking at the likelihood of this event, and if this event or this hazard does occur, how serious are the consequences? The level of risk will increase as the likelihood of harm and its severity increases. Again, so if you're working with something that is at high risk and high severity, the level of risk there is obviously going to be increasing. Controlling risks. So when you decide how to control your risks, you need to make sure that your workers and any representatives that are going to be affected by that, so you may have contractors that come in or suppliers that come in, that they're sort of involved or consulted within this process so that they know what the procedures are. You want to make sure that you're minimising and controlling these risks as much as possible. Some things can be fixed easily and should be done straight away. As I said, if you notice a spillage on the floor, cleaning it up straight away to eliminate that risk. Obviously there might be things that need more intensive, like having a safety shield over a piece of equipment, or you might need to order a new cabinet to put some materials in. That might not be something that could happen straight away, but how can you minimise that risk while you're waiting for that to come in? If you are waiting, as I said, for a new cabinet, or waiting for an electrician to come in and perform some rewiring to make sure that the wiring is safe, how can you minimise the risk in the meantime? So there's a little diagram here of the hierarchy of control. So the most effective way when we're looking at risk management is to eliminate it, physically remove the hazard. Substitute is the next best thing. Can we replace that hazard with something else? So say if we're working with chemicals and there's a toxic chemical and a non-toxic chemical, can we replace that toxic chemical with the non-toxic chemical to be able to substitute it and again try and reduce that risk as much as possible? Engineering controls, we want to be able to isolate people from the hazard. So if we know that this piece of equipment or this hazard could be quite dangerous, or there might be a high risk of something happening, how can we isolate people as much as possible? So it might be putting equipment in a locked storage cabinet, or again having some kind of safety barrier around it, or again, safety shield for, a lot of the like circular saws and those sorts of things, having their protective shields over them. Administrative controls, again, talking to people and trying to change the way that people do things. And then lastly, and the least effective, is the PPE, the personal protective equipment. Again, ideally we want to start at the top and try and eliminate those hazards and that risk as much as possible. But then if not, we sort of follow that hierarchy, because there are going to be circumstances where we can't eliminate that risk, and so we do have to provide workers with their personal protective equipment as part of being able to carry out their job and conduct the tasks that they need to. So your risk register may identify the hazards, what action needs to be taken, and then who will be responsible for taking that action. So you might go around your workplace and notice, some risks that are there, and you've identified the likelihood of that happening and then the severity if that were to happen. So if there are things there that need action taking, such as faulty wiring, then who's going to take action for that? Who's going to be responsible for having that fixed? So it might be, we might have an operations manager here on site, so I'll delegate that to the operations manager to get in touch with the electrician to come and have the wiring fixed safely. So different actions, again, helping you to monitor and control the measures. So up-to-date training and competency. Some workplaces, again, generally the bigger workplaces, have workplace health and safety officers on site. So they should be going around and monitoring and trying to control for these things as well. But you could always ask somebody to come in to your workplace and do an assessment for you if you're not sure, and provide that advice for you. Taking accountability for health and safety. Again, everybody in the workplace has a responsibility for health and safety, but again, there is that chain of command, that needs to be followed as far as addressing risks, trying to minimise the risks and the hazards. Maintaining plant and equipment. Obviously, if you've got a piece of machinery or some kind of equipment that needs regular servicing, who's going to be responsible for that? How frequently does that have to be done? So making sure that, again, that is taken care of. Also making sure that you have up-to-date hazard information. New information is coming out all the time, so making sure that you're aware of the latest requirements. So maybe they don't use this piece of machinery in this way anymore. Now they recommend this because this is a safer, more efficient way to do it. So making sure that you're staying up to date with that kind of information is also going to be very important. Development of occupational health and safety strategies. So in the, unfortunate event that an employee or a worker is injured in the workplace, that could be a physical injury or psychological injury, then workers' compensation laws, again, you'll need to be familiar with the appropriate governing body in your state or territory, require employers to participate in rehabilitation and return to work programs for injured workers. So this is to ensure that that worker has the opportunity to safely return to work. There is a little bit of a hierarchy when somebody has been injured. Ideally, we want that worker to be able to return to their position, their pre-injury position, so the same job that they were doing with their same employer. Sometimes that's not possible depending on the severity of the injury. So it may be that someone had a job that involved heavy lifting, they suffered, say, a back injury, and they're no longer able to carry out that heavy lifting. So they're not going to be able to return to that position, at least in the immediate future. So then the next alternative is to try and have a different job for that employee within the same employer situation. So is there a less physical role that this employee could now do, or do on a suitable duties basis? If that's not possible, maybe the person could still do that same job, but the employer is unable to retain them for whatever legal reason that may be. And in that case, the next sort of chain of command, I guess, or next hierarchy, is to try and get that employee the same kind of role, but with another employer, with a different employer. And then if that's not possible, it may end up being a completely different job with a completely different employer. So first and foremost, so we want the employee to return to the role that they were doing prior to becoming injured with their same employer. So being able to get back to work is very important in recovering from a work-related injury, and it also helps the worker to try and return to as much of a normal life as possible, again, depending on the severity and the nature of the injury, to try and reduce that burden as well, financially and emotionally, helping them return to work in a safe environment. As I just talked about, it may mean that the worker returns to their pre-injury position or another suitable position. It doesn't always mean that somebody has time off work if they are injured. It can just mean that they work on a graduated basis. So they work less hours or reduced hours, or maybe have some lighter duties. Again, maybe they had a physical position and then during their return to work process, they return on lighter duties, maybe working in the office where they don't have to get up and down or do heavy lifting. Being able to maintain that open and honest communication is a really important part of being able to return to work, because often the worker can feel isolated. They have a whole host of different things going through their mind as well, so they want to feel supported, and they should feel supported, particularly if the workplace has been responsible for their injury, be it physical or psychological. Also making sure that the communication is happening regularly and that they're supported as much as possible. So the sooner you can start planning, the better the chances of a positive return to work. So in some cases, employers, again depending on your state or territory and the legislative setup there, sometimes the workers' compensation insurer will allocate a rehabilitation provider to assist that worker, and so they will help facilitate the return to work process. They help to draw up suitable duties plans and have that approved by their medical practitioner, and liaise with the employer and look at what duties could be possible to try and get them back to work as soon as possible in a safe and durable manner. As we said, it could mean when they're returning to work that their duties might change, or the tools they use or the equipment they use might change, or they might move into a different area of the business. Again, sometimes you may have to compromise and look at alternative hours and alternative days as well as different duties, but really try and focus on what the worker can still do rather than focusing on what they can no longer do or they can't do in the foreseeable future. So some occupational health and safety policies and procedures If there's a notifiable workplace incident, you are required to report that immediately. You can face penalties if you don't report a notifiable incident. So those kinds of incidents that are notifiable are one where there's been a serious bodily injury, where there's been a death or a work-caused illness, dangerous events or dangerous electrical events. So again, if these happen, then they're notifiable, so you must report those, as well as any major accidents or serious electrical incidents. Non-notifiable incidents don't need to be reported to the authorities, but it is recommended that you record and investigate them. So, you should keep a health and safety log, if somebody reports an injury, because you may need that documentation again. So if someone has fallen over and just banged their arm, yes, you would still document that, of course, because you don't know if there's going to be any long-term repercussions from that, but it's not something that you would need to then notify the authorities around. However, if there was a major accident or, again, any of those circumstances we just mentioned, then they would be notifiable and you would need to report those to the authorities. So for the activities, again, please refer to the subject outline and your online academic who will lead you through this week's activities. I hope you've enjoyed that session. Obviously, workplace health and safety is a really crucial part of working, as well as having a private practice as well. So there's a lot there to take note of. Some of the resources here that you might like to refer to are detailed here on our reference list, so I encourage you to have a look at that as well and make yourself familiar with those, particularly if you are considering getting back into or getting into your own private practice in the very near future. So again, hope that you enjoyed that lesson, and I will see you on the next session. Bye for now.